So for the last couple weeks, I have been testing out the Sony a6700 in my normal recording environments just to see how this camera compares to my Sony ZV-E1 in the regular use case environments of doing calls, doing recordings, doing talks, doing interviews, recording podcasts, recording shorts, and hashtag all the things. And needless to say, I'm a little perturbed with the Sony a6700. This is in no specific order. I'm just sharing my first thoughts, impressions after trying this camera for a couple weeks as a real content creating entrepreneur, putting it through its paces. So the first big question is there really an $800 difference between this camera and the Sony ZV-E1 that I've been using? Because for most people, I don't think there is. Honestly, when you look at it, most of the stuff that you will want in this camera is already there. 4K 120, virtually no crop. 4K 60, you don't have to worry about an APS-C crop because it's already an APS-C sensor camera. So that's not something to think about. You have a microphone port, you have a headphone port. Yes, you can do clean HDMI out. You can even do 4K 30 via USB live streaming from the camera. You got 4K, 422 10-bit, you got S-Log3, you got H.265 codec in here. You even have the S-Cinetone, which it took some of the older cameras that are arguably way better than this camera. It took them a while to get S-Cinetone, and it comes in this camera. You get a fully articulating screen that you can use and record yourself with all of the time. You get the on-screen swipe options that you can swipe up for the quick menu if you want to use those. So you can swipe from left to right on either side if you want to get access to those on-screen menu options. And you get access to the new Sony menu that even the ZV-E10 should have had, but it didn't have, and it's in this camera. It's so many things in this camera. It is dumb. It is absolutely ridiculous. And I'm not gonna lie, after trying this camera, I'm a little perturbed that I switched from APS-C and then you get the bee's knees Hall of Fame for an APS-C creator style camera, save the FX30, bee's knees Hall of Fame hybrid style creator camera right afterwards, immediately after the ZV-E1 came out. So again, I asked the question, is there really an $800 difference? And for most people, I think for I'll just say like 85–90% of creators, I honestly think that answer is no, there's not. I think the bigger difference of whether or not it is an $800 difference is going to look at stuff like when you're getting into the color grading and having a full frame sensor the same as the A7S III or the revered FX3. Any one of those cameras, you're looking at really good cinema quality that you can produce on the ZV-E1, but you don't have access to exactly that on here. It's similar to the FX30, but it's not bad by any means. And literally the quality is based on the creator. It's not necessarily so much so the camera. So if your skills are up there, then you can get that much out of it. But I don't think that's most people, like the average creator. I think the average creator, they're doing videos like this. They're not maybe doing a ton of color grading, but they could be doing some level of professional work, but everybody has their own workflows. And that $800 difference is really just more in that skill territory than anything else. But the average everyday Joe Schmo stuff is in the camera. So let's talk about some of the stuff that is missing from the camera, from a creator experience, especially the stuff that I personally miss. The first of those is going to be product showcase mode. Doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but the more you have to keep readjusting to make sure you quite block the eye. Okay, so now I'm blocking the eye or really get it in front of the camera. Then it focuses, but then otherwise it kind of doesn't. Now there is a video that I did that shows you how to get a product showcase like mode setting on the camera. Even though it's not natively there, you still can adjust the settings to get it. So I'll put that video up in the information card and the description down below. But the product showcase mode is not a deal breaker, but it is just something that's a helpful feature. And I noticed that when I'm creating and I'm using the a6700, I am a little more annoyed just because it's something so basic. I wouldn't think that Sony would take that feature out. But as I shared in the previous video, just talking about the two of these options when this camera was first announced, is that they're separating the creator line of camera versus the more hybrid centric line of cameras like the a6000 series versus like the A7C Mark II and stuff like the ZV-E10 Mark II eventually when it comes out, and the ZV-E1. So ZV, more creator stuff. The A6000 series of cameras, starting with the a6700 and the A7C Mark II, that stuff is going to be more hybrid focused. So it's not a deal breaker, but it is something that I find extremely annoying the more that I'm creating, because I have to think like, oh crap, I'm using A6700, let me switch switch and adjust for product showcase mode or what have you. Yeah, you may just stay in zone focus mode or something and just literally block your face and hold it up to whatever you want. But when you're recording B-roll, you're recording a lot of natural B-roll for your business, and you want to get really close shots of something, of you writing or of you podcasting, or like it could be a button or whatever that thing is, and you want to get that really close shot, product showcase mode is a good mode to use for that. So it's not a big deal breaker, but it is something that's annoying and over time becomes a time waster. Most people do not look at settings as being time wasters or not, but I completely operate off of efficiency, and that's why I switched to the ZV-E1, because a lot of stuff that people that may be into the filmmaking or they're doing a lot of hybrid videography and photography work, that's not me. I do not live that lifestyle. I am a content creating entrepreneur. I make money with the stuff that I'm making, and the stuff that I'm making makes money for the business. And so because of that, I need my camera to serve me and work for me. So what a lot of people call a gimmick, or like stuff where it's following you around, I'm gonna show you in another video, not a previous one, I'm gonna show you in a new video that's coming out on the channel of why something like that AI tracking, if you are a content creator, is way better than everybody thought, because maybe you're not walking around a lot, but there's one way that a lot of people are not thinking to use it that I've started using it in the content. You may even already have seen it in this video, so stay tuned for that video. So there's that. Now, because the settings are extremely similar between the a6700 and the ZV-E1, it is not that different. I do miss having the dual base ISO in every picture profile mode on the ZV camera, because on the ZV-E1, it doesn't matter which one I have two different ISO base settings that I can switch to, and it goes from being a bit more noisier, like most people wouldn't notice, but I notice I want the best quality, so that's what I'm using the camera for. So it doesn't matter what log profile settings I choose on the ZV-E1, I have two ISO settings where it can be clean. So I can go to whichever ISO base that I'm closer to get the cleanest image out of the camera. So even though I'm not using any kind of like S-Log3 and all that stuff, which this camera does have, which is nice and appreciated, and I think it should have it in 10-bit, which it does, I'm not doing my regular videos on that. I don't want to color grade. I'm not into filmmaking and all the rest of that. I want access to that stuff, so when there's a project where I want to use it, we can switch to it, or an environment or a situation, we can switch to it, but I'm not doing that on a day-to-day basis. It slows down the workflow. And this camera does not have that dual base ISO on all of the picture profile settings. So it doesn't matter which one that I choose in here, I would have to go to S-Log3. Or if you want kind of close similarities, you can use S-Cinetone, and then you can have a bit more wiggle room in the dynamic range. And it's not that the exposure on this camera or the sensitivity is bad, it's just different. And once you get used to having more dynamic range, even in like very small different circumstances, it's just a matter of adjusting a light a little bit better, adjusting my exposure triangle a little bit different. And it's just those little differences I haven't had to think about since I've had the ZV-E1 that I would have to go back into thinking about on this camera. And it's stuff like that which makes me confident and comfortable in having the ZV-E1 over the a6700, but it's like really hardly no difference honestly between the two. It's just those minor things that I notice because I've used the ZV-E1. But if you haven't, and maybe you're coming from the ZV-E10 or the a6400 or a6600, then this is a perfect upgrade for it. Like, these are not even complaints, they're just differences. And then the piece to resistance would be the dynamic active stabilization, and this one not having it. I think that's probably by far the biggest difference, but it's not so bad to where you can't notice a difference. And it's different with me describing it versus you just seeing it and showing it to you. So let's go outside and I'll show you what that looks like. One of my favorite features that I love on the Sony ZV-E1 is by far the dynamic active stabilization. It is not something where like you're going to see complete gimbal-like quality, but it's pretty gosh darn good, simply because I'm walking. I don't have to protect my walk. I'm going to walk across some grass here, and you can see that maybe in the corners, because we're super wide, we're at 10 millimeters on the 10 to 18 f2.8. like, unfortunately, we're going to have dips and all kinds of bumps and stuff like that, and the major shapes it gets rid of. So let's switch to active, do the same path, and we'll see what the difference is. Tell me what you notice. So now we're on same lens setup, but instead of it being at dynamic active, it's on active. Same path, I'm just walking it in reverse. But what you'll notice is, unfortunately, some of that wobble is still there, but it's not bad. You know what I learned about dynamic active versus active stabilization? Active stab is actually sensor based, not digital based like we saw with the ZV-E10. Unfortunately, we just hit concrete, so it shouldn't be as bumpy, hopefully. But when you have IBIS in your camera, it does work way better. So let's switch over to the a6700 and see what that looks like on the camera. Same lens, virtually the same settings for the most part. And just for reference shot, this is the same setup, but we're in standard, and obviously IBIS is going at the same time as well. You can't turn IBIS on or off, it just is perpetually on. So that's something that you always have to account for. But let's go ahead and switch to the a6700. Now we are on the Sony a6700. Same exact setup on the 10 to 18 f2.8 Sigma lens. And the one thing you definitely notice the difference of, even though it's an APS-C lens on the full frame on the ZV-E1, is how much closer it is. Arm length is still the same, virtually not moving or doing anything different. We've been walking on concrete, so let's switch over to grass. Very unstable, up and down a little bit, but this is just what you can expect. We are on standard, and it's not going to be the best, especially we're not getting as many lenses that have OSS in them, but you still could use the Sony 10 to 18 f4 lens. It's one of the few wide APS-C lenses that, even though it's at an f4, has OSS. Why can't we get more of these lenses? So now we have switched over to active stabilization on the a6700, walking the same path, just in reverse. And so, like, it's fine. Let's not fall in a hole. But it's very doable for a lot of people. And honestly, the a6700, it doesn't have many quirks about it. Yeah, it doesn't have product showcase mode, but there are ways around it. There's a video I'm doing on that specific thing on how to get product showcase mode on this camera. But it's doable, but it's frustrating that it's not there. But here's one thing you don't have to worry about on the a6700 versus the ZV-E1. So this is 10 millimeters on the APS-C, and this is zoomed all the way in on the 10 to 18. But one thing you don't get on the ZV-E1 is on top of that APS-C, you can punch in even more and maybe make out those geese over there that are always very upset and angry, and maybe never should have been allowed on the arc to begin with. So this is one of the issues with being on an APS-C lens and why you want a wide lens like the 10 to 18 by Sony or this one by Sigma. And that's so that if you're using clear image zoom, you can punch in, but you still should be able to punch out and have a very wide shot. Now we're at 10 millimeters and you can see way more of the frame. And even though I'm obnoxiously close to the lens, I'm going to switch to the ZV-E1 so you can see just how much wider full frame is on a super wide lens. Even if it's APS-C, having to crop in at a 1.2 times crop, it's different if it's stationary, but I'll explain on the ZV-E1. Now we're back on the ZV-E1, and for reference, I'm still obnoxiously close, and we are at standard. And if you are zoomed all the way out, again, clear zoom not existent at this point. Let's go to active, and you can see how that cuts in. Then let's switch to 1.5 times crop, and there's a huge difference when you go from a 1.5 times crop all the way to 1.1. Now, if we back that out a little bit more, then you can see we are super wide. So as you notice, you can get around it not having the dynamic active, and of course you have catalyst browse. But for me, I mean, like, you let me know in the comments, what did you think about the footage? Would you really care that you don't have dynamic active stabilization? And granted, I don't have the stablest hand. Again, I think for like 90% of people, it's not that big of a deal, especially because you do have catalyst browse. You got a way better grip. Like, I miss my zoom rocker. I miss having it. This is not that valuable to me because I never switch off a video. I almost never switch off video. So that's not a big deal. I love it on this camera, but it's not something that's like, oh man, I get this now. I have to remember that this is there now. That's like a little bit of a difference. Nothing good, bad, or otherwise. It's just different. It's like, oh, I don't have my zoom rocker. It's like, ugh. So I picked the right choice. End of the day, personally, I picked the right choice between this camera not being out at the time, but what I thought Sony would do, which was way better than I thought. A6700, don't get me wrong, bee's knees Hall of Fame APS-C creator camera would go to this camera. But bee's knees Hall of Fame for me is still going to be the ZV-E1, because it's again, at the end of the day, have y'all seen like the clips from that movie, The Creator? Again, it just shows like, even if your skill level isn't there today, that's what you have the possibilities of doing. And I love watching Jason's channel. All he does is cover Sony cameras and stuff like that. And you look at some of his work, like Becky and Chris, you look at some of their work, or just any creators that are on the platform. They're doing amazing things with any camera. So for me, it was never about full frame or APS-C. I don't even really believe in the APS-C or full frame look. It's literally a difference of focal lengths. So that's not any big difference. But shoot, if I had never had like a desire to get access to everything that Sony's offering within the full frame lineup plus creator stuff, and that's what led to my ZV-E1 decision, the a6700 would have been a fantastic choice with no questionable differences whatsoever. There's literally so many similarities, it's not that big of a difference. So is there an $800 difference? For most people, probably not. But if you just want access to different stuff, then maybe that might lead you to a different camera. But this is a freaking amazing camera. Let me know, are you getting this, or do you already have this camera? Would you buy it over the ZV-E1? Or what makes sense for you for a purchase for a camera? Let me know down in the description down below. But if you want to see how to get product showcase mode on the a6700, make sure you check out the video on the screen, because that video will walk you through how to make those changes and pretty much still get it on this camera.